Post, everybody. Welcome back to the Gran Torino. Jump on board, get in the back. Let's go for a little spin. Before we do, I ask you, as I always do, don't forget, press the like button, press the subscription, and the little blue bell. Thank you all to all my donations, all my donors, my PayPal, and my Patreons, and also those of you with your monthly subscriptions, helping to elevate the platform on the Gran Torino website, World Wide Web, grantorino.ie. Don't forget, you'll check out the online store, the Gran Torino shop, and also there'll be a Teespring link in the description box down below. So for today's discussion, I want to introduce you my friend from across the water in Norway, my good friend Bjørn Rødal. Bjørn, how are you, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, my friend. Thank you for joining me today. Bjørn, just to my viewers worldwide, please just give us a quick background of what you're involved in, and what life is like day to day in Norway from the Norwegian perspective of the European. The surge in the populist movement, the gathering pace. What is it from your perspective, and how are you involved in the great awakening, so to say?
Yeah, I can give you a quick rundown on who I am. I am currently, I live in Bergen. It's the second largest town here in Norway. I am involved in several political and cultural initiatives in Norway in order to turn the ship around, so to speak. I realized that I couldn't be passive anymore and look at the path that our nation and our European civilization was heading down, and I knew that I had to contribute. I'm young, I'm strong. Sitting around, looking at what's going on, you have a responsibility. So I just felt, you had to rise to the call of duty and get involved somehow.
So with that in mind, and what has that led you into? What organizations are you currently involved in? And that's to say, is it a cultural movement? Is it a youth movement? Are you politic? Are you advocating?
Right. Currently, I'm running in the local elections here in Norway. We're having a local for provincial and municipalities are up for election this September. So I'm running in my home district in the provincial government. Currently, I am working actively in what you can translate as the Norwegian Independence Party. So it, of course, it's taken some inspiration from the UKIP, but also I would say a lot of inspiration from other European political parties, such as Alternative for Germany, Alternative for Sweden. Also, we got some new Danish parties coming up, and basically it's a part of the wave of, I would say, nationalist and populist and initiatives cropping up all over Europe. So the Norwegian Independence Party, that's where I'm currently involved, and I'm mostly involved. I'm also involved in other more cultural initiatives that is not purely political, but it's more like cultural, spiritually in nature, which I think are equally important, if not more important, in the long run.
I agree. Yeah, no, I very much agree, and it's something that's hardly needed on this side of the pond as well. But who knows? Just to give you a brief example of what got you started on this journey. What was your kind of minute?
Well, I can give you a quick background who I am and about myself. My background is I served in the military in the Norwegian army did my how to say what do you call it? Yes. It's you have basic obligations to serve for a year, and then I also enlisted for another 3 years at the local like a QRF, quick response force, where you are called upon to support local law enforcement if necessary, and it's basically like a national guard that you can enlist into after you're done with your
national service.
Yes, your national service. So I stayed there for a while, And then in between, I did the university studies. I lived in Russia. I lived abroad. I lived in Russia, in St. Petersburg. I studied political science, security politics. I also lived in Montreal in Canada for a year. And just traveling around and doing these studies, it got me a broader perspective on what was going on in the world, and I could see the same trends going on. For example, I stayed 1 year in Montreal in Canada. I could look at what was going on over there, and I could see that the same trends was like prevalent all over the Western Hemisphere. And then
you got a kind of pattern recognition. You recognize patterns.
Right. So then I had my time in Russia. It was interesting to contrast, Eastern Europe and Western Europe, to see that, basically these are, still a Christian civilization. It still comes from, there are a lot of similarities in the roots. I mean, there are differences too, but there are similarities, and yet the patterns that, the path we're on are very different. You could say that the Eastern Europe has a more sensible sense of policies as compared to what's going on in Western Europe. So all of this put together, it kind of like gave me perspective of understanding on what was going on back in my own country and in Western Europe, and including I mean the US and Canada as well, being a part of our Western Hemisphere. So other than that, I did my master's in system dynamics, which is modeling and analysis of complex systems with feedback loop, cybernetics, that kind of stuff, which is I combined with my more sociological and political science background with a more engineering, math heavy master's degree, and this really, it helped me get a strong perspective on looking at the civilizational dynamics that is going on, to put it like that.
So in real-time terms, some of the stuff that you see day to day, like the demographic changes, the changing crime rates, the different graphs that point to the indicators that, because we've got this open border, have had now for the last number of decades now, and it seems to be in the last 10 to 15 years it's ramped up. It's felt here in Little Ireland. Recent statistics said that the passport office recently issued up to 2 million Irish passports not long ago. So with the continuation of new renewals, how much of the additional new passports were issued to new citizens? The demographic changes are becoming quite alarming, and quite prevalent here in Ireland, that you can notice them. How did you first become, or what is the general consensus among the Norwegian people? I know, I'm sure you'll have your liberals there, you've got your socialists, all that kind of stuff. But on an economic sense, where the struggle is Norway in debt? Is your societal norms?
No, Norway is currently not in debt. In that perspective, Norway has a unique position. We are in a unique position considering to compare us with other, Western countries. We're one of the few countries in the world that is not in a debt. We have a huge sovereign wealth fund, which put us in a unique position, or so one should think. However, it's a little bit more complicated than that. So even though Norway don't have a debt or a net debt per se, it's not that clear cut. So we do have a huge sovereign wealth fund, and this sovereign wealth fund is heavily invested abroad. So although it looks like we're not having a debt per se, a net debt, I should say, we do have a government debt, which we can get into, and it was just crazy. We don't really need it because you have this wealth fund. Yeah, however, so this is pretty interesting. So one should think that Norway is in a very strong position, and compared to a lot of other European nations, we are actually. However, this sovereign wealth fund could be easily lost. So if we have a global financial crisis, which most likely we will get a new
Deutsche Bank's already laying 20,000 of its staff off. Deutsche Bank's already laying 20 of its staff.
Right. So we're ready. So you could say that the stars are aligning for a new, huge financial crisis. Huge. And this one is going to be way bigger than the one back in 2007, 2008. That's going to be like a firecracker compared to a ton of TNT. Like it's going to be a nuclear tsunami of financial debt when this next financial bubble is going to pop, and it's going to happen. It's hard to predict exactly when that is happening, but definitely we're ripe for an even bigger financial crisis, like of a magnitude of like 100 times perhaps larger than the one back in 2008. So the thing is, though, although Norway don't have a debt, this should put us in a fairly speaking good, like, negotiation, like when it comes to negotiating with, for example,
a bit of leverage. Give you a bit of
leverage in negotiations with, let's say, the European Union, of which Norway is not officially a member. This is also quite interesting. Although we do have the EEA membership, so we are like three quarters member of the European Union, and it's absolutely sucks. So, but that's a separate issue. So the point is that Norway could really be independent if we wanted to, with the oil wealth, with highly educated population, with low unemployment rates, natural resources. We have great engineers. All of these things are right for the country of Norway to be independent. We can produce a lot of things ourselves, and what we can import by trade deals that we can negotiate, because we have the leverage to do that. However, the powers that be in Norway, those that govern our system, are heavily invested globalists into the globalist scheme. So although we would be able to negotiate for better positions, or even go our own way, and this is both to the so-called left and to the and the right, like the traditional Conservative Party and the traditional old school Labour parties, Labour Party and socialist parties. They're basically towing the same
globalist agenda,
globalist line. Yes, it's just marginal differences. Like some people want, like you could say, the Conservatives, they want maybe reduce the income tax by 2%, and the Labour Party wants to raise it with 2%. I mean, it's nonsense. It's nonsense. There's no real difference. Like the Labour Party doesn't even represent the laborers, Norwegian laborers, and Norwegian workers anymore. So anyway, getting back to my point. So Norway is technically in a very good position. However, politically speaking, we're not. So we're not taking, we're not utilizing the possibilities that Norway could have. And Norway could even be a leader in showing other European nations how to be independent if we wanted to. Relatively small population. Like I said, like the income differences are not too big. Still is a country of high trust. So we do have all of these things in place in order to go our own way. However, there's the mainstream media, mainstream politicians, they don't have the political will to do that. So tying that back to the sovereign wealth fund, just to get a little bit technical, it would basically be wiperized by the next, by the next financial crisis. And we have invested it all over the world. So we basically have no control. We're given the wealth of the sovereign wealth of the Norwegian citizens are given out to mega corporations and bankers. Globalist bankers are having a field day with our money that would be better suited to protect our own interests back at home. So I mean, we can always talk about okay, it's smart to make investments in different places to spread your risk. But the whole global financial system is ripe for collapse. So you're basically putting all your eggs in the same basket, even if you're investing in, different companies with different names. They all depend on this old financial structure, which is bound to collapse. So it's all based on usury. It's like
You know, your corporation could be potentially worth 20 billion, but your debt is still 21 billion. You're perpetually chasing debt. So in essence, government corporations are bankrupt.
So what we did, we took all our money out of our country. Norway had this is back in 2004. Norway had a huge gold reserve. We still had a gold reserve all the way to 2004, which was sold. And the parliament wasn't even informed. It was just like the stroke of a pen done by the central bank in Norway. Just sold our gold away to
them old central bankers again. I would love to get a political party.
Right.
The central bank.
It's absolutely like you would say that, but they're all a part of a much larger global economic machinery. So Norway have all the ingredients necessary to be independent, and Norwegians generally, you know, the gut feeling of most Norwegians are that we are very independent-minded people. Like Norway voted no 2 times to the European Union, membership in the European Union. 2 times we voted no. And last time was
I'm sorry, Bjørn, that vote stood. So you didn't join in. We voted twice on Lisbon, and twice we were told to change our vote, and off we did. And you say your sovereignty, your financial sovereignty is almost guaranteed. The Norwegian people walk around that. We used to presume that we were militarily neutral, yet we have Irish Defence Forces now heading over to battle group engagements over in Germany. So they'll be patrolling the streets of France or wherever European gets them to deploy, pretty much like the Yellow Vests are getting beaten up by Turkish police forces, because they're not French police, they're UN peacekeepers out on the streets in France, and they're Moroccans, and they're pepper spraying, gas spraying, beating the living, murdering people over there. But it's all under the guise of the eternal moral provider that is the UN. You know, the UN's charters loads of things, but the UN's coming under so much grip for rape allegations, pedophilia, human trafficking. It can no longer claim to be the moral arbitrator of what we should adhere to.
Absolutely. No, and I would say what's interesting with the position of Norway is that we're still, how to say, a small country on the outskirts of Europe. So we have the advantage of looking like we can look at the spectacle going on, let's say in France, going on in Germany, and in Sweden. Oh man, don't get me started on Sweden. It's so fun. Norwegians are making so much fun of Sweden these days.
I have many great guests. I have Stefan comes on over here because perspective on his YouTube channel. I don't know if you caught that interview. But where are the masses? I mean, they're just still stuck to the high trust that the government wouldn't do anything nefarious to harm its own citizens. No, but of its allegiances are to a communist hierarchy.
But you would say that Sweden is a much more conformist country than, let's say, the spirit of Norway. Although we are, you know, like brothers, you know, Swedes and Norwegians are brothers, brother people. We share the same peninsula. We love and hate each other to death. And of course, I do care about Sweden's situation. I am sympathetic to it. However, the coastal mentality of Norway, at least what I would call the real Norway, which is the western coast, the coastal western coast of Norway, which anyway is basically where most of Norway's industry and income and stuff like is anyway. We are way more independent-minded than, for example, the average Swede. So Norwegians don't have a problem standing up to power, and standing up to our own authorities. Like, you know, when we feel justified to do that, way more than the Swedes. So, but this is interesting. Most Norwegians, though, they feel something is wrong, but they have problem articulating it. I think that's because the education system is being basically a unitary government education system that's been in Norway for the last 100 years, and even more since the Second World War. This has even increased even more. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that, of course, like every other Western country, the mainstream media narrative is the same. Like, it's the same pundits saying the same things, repeating the same globalist neoliberal narrative that is going on. So that is the same as everywhere else. So you see, Norwegians, they do have a healthy gut feeling. However, we lack most people lack the the tools.
Articulation to express it. I remember you're saying that before.
What's going on. But what's interesting is that we have toll stations in Norway, and this is something that's been cropping up very recently. Lots of toll stations. It inhibits people to travel, especially the working class and those with lower income. They get penalized the most because they have to spend proportionally more of their income to pay for not only gas, which is very expensive in Norway for oil producing country, but super high taxes on gas. That's one thing. But toll stations on top of that, which limits, I would say average people, the average Joe, it's just being very much penalized and limited by, his freedom of movement. You're driving your kids to soccer practice or driving, if your kids go to some kind of like sports or whatever, you're being penalized every time going through the toll station. And this is something that Norwegians right now are very fed up with. And they're expressing it by tearing down these toll stations. And they're expressing it's interesting. They're expressing it by blocking roads. They're using tractors and they're using big trucks to block roads. They're driving, they're slowing down traffic. So this actually got legs to stand on. And here in Bergen, this is interesting. The largest party in Bergen right now is the anti-toll station party, which was just formed recently this year. So you see that this is an expression of a dissatisfaction, but also I would say a disgust with the current bureaucratic political leadership that has led us down to a place where it's starting to become very, very constrained to live as an ordinary citizen. And this is happening in one of the most wealthy countries in Norway. Norway is one of the wealthiest countries in Europe. So it's interesting to see the contrast, how people in Norway aren't necessarily super rich, even if the government are very rich and has like on paper is one of the richest countries in the world. On paper, that's not necessarily the case when it comes to how every the everyday of the ordinary citizen. So there's a gap between the freedom and, one should say, the wealth that the average citizen has compared to the amount of wealth that the ruling classes, or I should say not the ruling classes, but the political classes, how you want to say it, how they benefit from a lot of these privileges because they have a bureaucratic system and they are insiders in this system and they know how to get the most of it. So
you should say that there, Bjørn, just to cut across, because we have something similar going on with direct provision centres, that government, our justice ministry is procuring vacant hotels, bed and breakfast to facilitate what I can term as human trafficking. What they say is the Syrian refugee program. But if you go on inspection like I have and go check, and most of the Syrians are young fighting age men of Nigerians, they're all sorts of ethnicities, claiming to be Syrians without any full validation. They're staying here then in a 9-month process of till their refugee asylum status gets sorted. My point being, Bjørn, is that it seems to be local councillors and local politicians who are, again, a higher proportion of them are landlords. Most of them are millionaires in our political class, and it then seems to transport through nepotism and through their friends, giving them a joke, get a hotel over there, we'll push some people your way.
We call it the asylum industry, and this is happening in Norway too, where you have a whole industry of people making big bucks. So the government basically pays private companies to host immigrants and asylum seekers. So they, of course, then in turn have an economic incentive to keep this system going. Now, I'm saying that this is not the primary reason why this is happening in the first place, but I'm saying that this is something that contributes to solidify the politics, like the asylum policies that are in place, that is absolutely being abused. This is something that was supposed to give to certain individuals that were prominent individuals that were, for example, standing up they were really politically prosecuted. For example, I would even look at someone like for example, like Tommy Robinson would be someone that is politically prosecuted in Britain, and he would be eligible for asylum, let's say, in a country like Norway. So these were never meant to bring in masses and masses of hundreds of thousands of millions of people into Norway, into Ireland, into Europe. This was specific high-profile cases where someone was like talking truth to power in one of their own countries, and they were being then prosecuted unjustly for it. This is what asylum was about, and it was always supposed to be temporarily until that situation was resolved. Now, people very often they conflate asylum with refugees. These are two different legal statuses, and very often they're confused, like conflated with one another. Like refugee is something that has one definition, asylum seeker is something very different. But there's a whole asylum industry. So one part of it is what you brought up, that you do have local, businessmen who then, for example, or making money out of settling these asylum seekers and making these asylum centers. And then, of course, they have friends in the local community council, and then they're asking to get more asylum seekers and so on and so forth. This is one part of the problem. The other thing is that, of course, you do have what used to be the traditional left, or the old left, so to speak. Like we have like a socialistic left party in Norway. We do have the Labour Party, and we do have a couple of others like the Green Party, which shouldn't really be on the right or the left, which is another discussion. Anyway, a huge proportion of their voters are third world immigrants, and they're also asylum seekers and refugees that through some how to say legal mumbo jumbo gets the right to vote, especially in local elections, if not in
happening here as well. Happened the exact same thing here as well.
Right. And these people should not be eligible to vote. But the way the way the system is being run, they are given the right to vote after 1 or 2 years being settled in Norway. So of course you have to look at the left side, which is now losing the support, I would say, of the Norwegian stock. I mean, they do still have some support in the ethnic Norwegian population, but it's dwindling. That is dwindling. Are keeping their numbers up by importing voters from the third world. So that's another part of the issue. And the third, and perhaps the most important reason I think we do have the open border policy is because of economic reasons. And this is because the multinational, globalist, huge corporations that have they have a lot of our parliamentary politicians in their pockets, that through various organizations like Davos and so forth, they want open borders because they want free movement of capital, they want free movement of goods, and they want free movement of people.
Free labor market movement, yeah.
Free labor, so they can then press the wages around in the European countries that we have worked very hard for. We built advanced and sophisticated economies, and we negotiated to getting a wage above the living wage, so that we can have civilized, comfortable and civilized life for most citizens. Like of course, if you work hard and you're creative and so on, you take a risk and so forth, you can make more money than others. You're allowed to do so. This is natural and this is fair. But at the same time, we made a system that you could have a decent life and comfortable living. However, bringing in a lot of cheap labor, it could either be from Eastern Europe, or it could be from the Middle East, it could be from India, it could be from South America. All these things are pushing the labor markets in the industrial or more advanced economies. For example, point in case Norway. So that is also, I think, that the main economical driver driving the open border policies are these globalist multinational corporations. They want access to cheap labor, but they want it in a high tech country. So I think this is so we have mentioned like 3 reasons of vested interest that are driving for these open borders. So you have leftist parties are losing the support of the ethnic let's say the European ethnic population. They're importing voters. You have local councils and local businessmen who are making money out of the asylum industry, and then you have the access to cheap labor. by the multinationals. And these interests, they converge. And on top of that, you have the global banking architecture facilitating. So this is a part of the economic structure driving open borders, I would say.
So I wonder,
and then, of course, ideological component to this as well, multiculturalism, and that's the ideological component to this, where most of young, naive university students are being told as a ideological smokescreen to gain the acceptance of this.
Just a more form of indoctrination. I just want to round us off before we head off, Bjørn. With the to tie it back into the as we presume, we don't know the timescale when it's due, but the tsunami of credit default that's about to crunch and cripple many economies, and ours is succinctly well open. The Irish Times has recently spoke about Ireland's weak position with the 250 billion in debt. But should the financial crisis reset, we have now got, with the open borders, social housing and welfare state, and free movements of people, we're going to have this conflation where there's going to be no funds to pay either any of these social housing and rent. They're going to struggle to make payments to the social welfare payments. I don't know if you have anything similar, but do you purport to, or do you think that similar things will happen when that wave comes? The welfare state will collapse.
Will collapse.
Who knows what pursues
and actually, as painful as that might be, perhaps that's in the long run, perhaps that's a good thing. That will be a wake-up call, and it will be a painful medicine in order to rectify and correct all of these imbalances. And that's when you will see where are your real loyalties. And immediately people in these situations will revert back to family and your own in-group. So having a huge population of immigrants in your that is not integrated or settled or have any sort of solidarity with the host population, you're gonna see default lines along these ethnic cultural lines, and that and then you're inside the same territory. This is inviting say conflict into your country. So I think there's a way out of this, and I think. Essentially, there's so much to it. You could look at the environment, for example, too, which is a huge thing. Like the environmental issues, they're a real thing. However, the global warming is taking all the attention away from real environmental issues, such as the poisoning of the oceans, poisoning of the soil, soil erosion, for example. You have overpopulation in the third world. There's a lot of issues that we need to handle and we need to tackle, but unfortunately there's too much focus on the global warming, taking away from real issues that will wreck us and potentially kill us on a global scale. But so that's another part of this globalist scheme. So I think the solution to this is localism, going back to your roots, cooperate with your neighbors, learn how to survive in a simple life, band together, get organized, basically communal living again. I think that's what we need, and we need a spiritual awakening. There's definitely the key. What we need is a spiritual solution to this.
I agree very much, but I would assume.
Yeah.
Sorry, Bjørn. A spiritual awakening will come from our coming together under a Christian ethos or whatever that may be, because we need that spirituality to define ourselves, to understand that our constitutions and our sovereign individual rights. As individuals, we are sovereign individuals, and to express the power that we control over our governments, and we just allow too much. We give too much control to governments. Same as our child referendum, our child protection services over here, absolute shit show with mothers getting jailed for 9 months for trying to highlight their own cases with no media attention because they're gagged under media offers of media gags from the Minister of Children.
Absolutely, and I would say that the shifting consciousness that is required here, fundamentally, what it is a shift away from materialism over to idealism, or over to a spiritual foundation. That we have to shift away from materialism and the mechanical way of looking at the society, life, and the universe. Like it's a machine way of thinking and looking at the world that is caused, underlying at least, it's caused a lot of these problems that we have, that is non-sustainable. It's not sustainable in forms of demographics. It's not sustainable in forms of environmental issues. It's not economic issues. It's not sustainable. So the underlying thing, what the shift away from materialism and towards essentially what it is to be human, and what does it mean to be a man, and what does it mean to be a woman, and then to have a spiritual understanding of life and an ideal to strive towards in your personal life that is greater than yourself, that you're striving for your, you're striving for your nation. You're striving for your nation, that you have an upward looking perspective of life. And today, in the materialistic sense, we're looking in a sense, in a linear sense, or in a horizontal sense, and we don't lift our thoughts and we don't lift our eyes up to the higher hierarchy, up towards God, basically, and towards the natural order of things. And instead, we're making a synthetic order, trying to play God, basically. This is a story about the Tower of Babel, where you basically you're playing God. This is basically what's going on. And in our arrogance, we have made these structures that will collapse upon themselves, because we have gone away from the natural way, the natural order of things. So back to localism, back to family, back an orientation towards a quest for spiritual truth in your own life, and also basic human freedom, and to treat nature around you, to treat it with respect and a certain sense of dignity. And even animals around, we being close to animals around us, like being on a farm or being a hunter, like traditionally, even though at the time you kill the animal, it was always a sense of reverence and respect. If you look at the meat industry like we have today, it's absolutely abhorrent, and the meat isn't even like healthy anymore. And I'm saying that this is giving so much other social implications. For example, so there are so much. That's what I'm talking about, like localism. We need to look at quality instead of quantity, and so on and so forth. Perhaps we even have to reduce our consumption, but what we consume is high quality. And it goes the same for entertainment. It goes to what are we consuming spiritually? What are we consuming educationally, culturally, and even physically? What are the sustenance that we're taking into our bodies? And this is the body temple, and then we create a greater temple, which is the family and the nation. And so there's natural spheres building upon each other. And right now it's been a disintegration of that. So I think spiritual vitalism is what's needed, really, essentially, to bring this about. So how do we do it in practical terms? Well, I'm doing my initiatives through a political initiative, but I'm also involved in other initiatives, cultural initiatives, and I think that this is what essentially what is needed. We need to find our roots.
Perfect, Bjørn. I'm going to wrap it up there, just cognizant of the time. I want to thank you very much for joining me and giving me a great perspective. And we will touch back in again in the months to come.
Absolutely. Like there are so many other things. I would love to come back on your channel again, and I can give you a unique Norwegian perspective on
100%. So just before we go, just tell people the way you're running, what's coming up on your horizon. Politically said you were running in the campaign. Just tell us when we can expect any results from them. And we'll keep an eye.
That's going to be the 9th of September. It will be the results will be in, and we are putting most of our efforts into Oslo, because that's where it's mostly needed, and that's where we're best organized right now. So the results will be in September. There are other, meta-political initiatives being going on in Norway. There's a lot with the new conservative student organizations that is coming up. So I would say that the trend is changing. It's like I'm much more hopeful now than I was, let's say, a couple of years ago. But things will polarize, and things will escalate, and things will get worse before they get better. But that's where you need courage, and you need the spiritual courage to stay the course.
Oh, it's fantastic, Bjørn. Thank you very much for that. I'm going to round it up there. as I think we can see, and as I keep saying throughout the nations of Europe, Logos is rising. Us, everybody. See you on the next episode. Cheers, Bjørn. Thank you, brother.
Bye.